Eric, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me, Sean. I appreciate you bringing me on your podcast.
Absolutely. So you are the host of the Stoic Coffee Break podcast. So as an introduction, what was your inspiration for doing that podcast and how has it been so far, that experience?
Yeah, so I originally started the podcast as a practice of making a podcast. So I had wanted to make a podcast for years. I'm a musician as well, just as a hobby, and podcasting was interesting to me. I was listening to a lot of different things. And so I started the podcast initially as just I was going to practice making one. And I tried making one before on music soundtracks. I was going to call it the soundtrack.fm, but I didn't like anything that I made. I think I made like 2 episodes and then just never did anything with it. And then in 2018, I had a New Year's resolution to create a podcast. And so I kept it really simple, and I just used Anchor at the time, which was later bought by Spotify, and just used my iPhone to record podcast episodes. And it was really just a practice to figure out how to make a podcast and see what worked, what didn't work, what I liked. And even though I had thousands of dollars of musical equipment and audio gear and all of these things, it was too intimidating for me to try and record my voice and put it out there. And so I just used my phone. And, and my ex-partner had me make a deal where I had to make at least 100 episodes of a podcast before I could quit, because she's like, you quit things too easy. And I was like, okay. And so I did 137 days in a row. And yeah, which was quite an effort. I just kind of got in that habit and just kept it rolling. And it was quite an ordeal to be able to do that. But in doing so, it really helped me to get a back catalog of things out there. And so throughout my podcast, I've taken some time off just from personal reasons or things going on. And because I had so much content already out there, it was really easy for people to still listen to it, even though I think I took a total of maybe 2 years off total in the last, since doing it. And I've been doing it since 2018. But yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey. And I find that for me, even though I took time away, I kept coming back to it because I would learn these lessons in my life. And I would be like, oh man, this is such an important lesson. I need to share this with other people because people need to know these things. And so what happened was like I said, I took a break, and then I was like, oh, this lesson is so important, I have to do another one. And so I create one, and then I do some more for a while. I restarted back at episode, I think it was 20 or 218. Maybe it was sometime before that, but right around that time was when I had taken a last break for a while, and then got back on and have been doing them ever since. And last week was episode 300.
Yeah, that's such an achievement in podcasting, because a lot of them fall flat after maybe like 4 or 5 episodes. So just have that consistency is like really impressive. And I would say, what specifically about Stoicism and Stoic philosophy drew you towards it in the first place, and eventually having a podcast revolving around that topic?
Yeah, so I initially got introduced to Stoicism by Tim Ferriss. I was listening to his podcast one time, and he mentioned A Guide to the Good Life, The Art of Stoic Joy by William Irvine. And he said, this book changed my life. And Tim reads a lot of books, as we know. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. But then I heard Stoic Joy in the title. And I was like, wait, what is Stoic Joy? What does that mean? And so I was curious about the paradox of what that meant. And so I ordered the book on Amazon. And then that was when I learned that Stoicism was a philosophy, even though I'd taken a philosophy 101 class back in college, and I may have read about Stoicism, but did not remember at all, and it didn't even click for me. And so I started reading this book, and I got quite a bit out of it, but I didn't have those kind of like lightning bolt moments for me. And about 6 months, 7 months later, I decided, okay, I really need to try this again. and I bought the audiobook and would listen to it on the way to and from work. And that was when I had those aha moments. I kept having those light bulb moments of just like, oh, that's so fascinating. I never thought the world worked this way, or I never thought about looking at the world this way. And it really changed my perspective on just basically how the world works. And from that point on, it was just something that I was thinking about every single day. I was studying it all the time, and just finding that in doing so, it just kept improving my life all the time. And part of the reason why I kept doing the podcast for so long is that sitting down and working on these episodes every single week, almost every single day, was something that really just had a profound impact on my life. And in working through these hard things to try and explain them to other people, then I would learn more about Stoicism, and it just became it's so ingrained in the way that I think now. It's just really a part of me at this point. And I used to joke around that, well, I still joke around with friends of mine that my podcast is my public therapy, because usually something that I'm working on is bugging me and I'm struggling with it. And so I will do an episode on something about that. And then that's kind of where most of my ideas come from. And yeah, so for me, it's just been really about personal growth. And doing that podcast has been a way for me to really grow by sharing it with other people.
For anybody who's new to Stoicism as a concept or as an idea, in simple terms, I know it's not obviously something that could be summed up too quickly, but generally, how would you define Stoicism?
For me, there are just a few core tenets within Stoicism. And one of the things that I like about Stoic philosophy is that it is very simple in many ways. There's a lot of concepts within it, but the core of it, there are just a few concepts and principles that if you understand those, then, everything is built off the rest of that. And the Stoics believe that we should live a life of rationality and virtue. And obviously rationality and reason, being able to use logic as part of your daily process of how you do things. You do your best to make the logical choice rather than just the emotional choice. And by virtue, what they mean is that you practice wisdom, courage, justice, meaning how you treat other people, and self-discipline. So they call it temperance. It's also translated as moderation. But those four virtues are self-reinforcing, which is one of the things that I really like about them, because it takes courage in order to gain wisdom, because you have to be willing to try things and fail and to put yourself out there and say, I don't know what this is, and practice that kind of self-awareness. Then you need wisdom to be properly courageous, because if you're foolhardy, then you can get yourself killed because you're reckless. Otherwise, you might be cowardly. So it takes wisdom to be courageous. And then how we treat other people takes wisdom, because we have to know what to do, and courage, because sometimes standing up and doing the right thing is not easy. And so we have to have that courage. And then you wrap that around with self-discipline, and that's what living a life of virtue is. The next big concept, and this is probably one of the things they're most known for, is the dichotomy of control. And that means just clearly understanding what it is that you actually have control over in this life. And understanding that and recognizing that and letting go of the things you can't control is probably one of the fastest ways to, restore peace in your life, and to have a lot more, just be more relaxed about life in general, because there's really only a few things that you control. And that is the way that you think about things. So your perspective, your opinions, your judgments on things, and then the choices that you make and the actions that you take. And that's it. That's all we have control over. And for most people, they always try and come up with, well, what about this? And what about that? And it's like, when it all boils down to it, you really have control over nothing else and nobody else except for yourself. And that really comes down to your perspective, your choices, and your actions. Because you don't even have control over your body. Like, you get cancer, you didn't want cancer, but you got cancer. You can control what you do about it. You control your perspective about how, what you're going to do about cancer and how you're going to approach that. And you're going to take control, you can make choices about the actions you're going to take if you get cancer. But you can't control whether or not you have cancer.
Yeah, I think it's to do with changing perspective into being less just judgmental and more observant is something that I've thought a lot about it in terms of, especially in to do with emotional regulation. I feel like a lot of people are very reactive immediately to certain emotions, but I feel like Stoics are more controlled in the sense of they kind of acknowledge that there is something that has occurred to them and then act accordingly rather than immediately doing the first thing that comes to mind, which might not necessarily be the best thing. And in terms of the idea of being able to control only what you can control and accepting that, how can someone who's new to this idea shift that mindset to stop themselves trying to control external events and focusing more on their internal responses?
I think a lot of it comes to just becoming more aware of your own thinking. So I think that's one of the hardest things about Stoicism is that it has a lot to do with self-awareness. And developing that self-awareness takes a lot of effort. And I think, as humans, we're kind of lazy. And so we don't like to put that kind of effort into it. So the first step is really just understanding your thinking. And that's what meditation is really about, or journaling. It's not that you're going anywhere trying to do any specific task. It's that you're observing your own thinking. You're writing down your thoughts. When you're meditating, you're just kind of watching all the thoughts bounce around in your head. At least that's one type of meditation that I do. Is I just pay attention to the chaos that goes on, and just listen to and watch all of these different thoughts that are bouncing around. And in doing so, that allows you to just become more comfortable in your own mind. You start to recognize patterns that are happening in your thought processes. And that allows you to take a little bit of space between when something happens, between the stimulus of something and your response. And too often, most people don't take that time. They don't practice that kind of reserve. And at first, when I was studying Stoicism, I thought, I just have to, practice not reacting. That's how I'm going to get better about this. But I found that really was kind of counterproductive, because in trying not to do something, oftentimes you make that thing worse. It's like, don't think of a pink elephant, and you immediately think of a pink elephant. And so rather than focusing on, I'm not going to be reactive about things, I tried to look more at the core of why I was reactive about things. And again, getting into my own mind and recognizing my thought patterns, my thought processes. So about 3 years ago, I did a meditation practice where I meditated for 60 minutes a day for 60 days in a row. And I think I missed one day, and there were 2 days that I did 30 minutes, but otherwise I made it that 60 days, 61, because I made up for the one day that I missed. And I got that practice from Naval Ravikant, and he talked about how after he did that, his base level of just anxiety in life was, had dropped dramatically. And so I was like, okay, let me give this a try. And the one thing I noticed was that in doing so, the first 30, maybe 40 minutes was just my mind just kind of chaotically bouncing around and just from thought to thought and things moving along. And I would just kind of watch it and pay attention to it. And I try and slowly bring, focus back to my breath a little bit, see if I could kind of get things to relax. But then after that half hour, 40 minutes, then things kind of simmered down. It was kind of like this, kind of like a storm on a lake. And then suddenly, the storm passes on and suddenly everything's a little more placid and relaxed. And I've found that after doing that I'm much more relaxed throughout the day, and it's much easier to get myself into a calmer mindset to where I can be more objective about looking at things. So it really just takes practice of getting to know your thoughts. It takes practice of looking at things as objectively as possible. So trying to distance yourself from an emotion in a situation. Even if you can't do it in the situation, if you can take some time afterwards and reflect on it, saying, okay, well, what did I do on the emotional side? What were really the facts about the situation? Was I, what kind of thoughts did I have that created the emotions that I was feeling? And I think when we get good at being able to separate, what are the facts about the situation? and what are my feelings about the situation and what are my thoughts about the situation, then we can do a lot better. And I think that's a good way to practice objectivity. Because a lot of us just go, well, what does it mean to be objective? It doesn't mean to turn off your emotions. It's like, no, it's not turning off your emotions. For me, objectivity means you can look at something and just go, okay, what are the facts about the situation? Just, straight up look at things in a very factual way. Anything that you could prove in a court of law allows you to practice that objectivity. So that way it makes it easier for you to discern between what was my emotion about the situation and what is actually just a fact in the situation.
Well, I was going to ask, where do you think that fallacy, I think Stoicism has become a bit trendy a lot recently with people in social media who like to just throw around the word as more of a meaning to be like heartless, emotionless, like literally like absolutely no reaction to anything happening in your life. Like the most terrible thing happened, you just have no emotion, and that's considered stoic. Where do you think that misconception has come from, and how can people who understand the topic better reframe it so then people don't misunderstand stoicism as being emotionless?
I think where it originally came from was that because the Stoics and anybody who practiced Stoicism after them basically could be in a crisis of some kind or some situation that was happening that your average or most people might respond in a very heated sort of way or get upset about it or, freak out and go running down the street, and the Stoic would just look at it and be like, okay, I can see what's going on here, and being able to have that objectivity and being able to understand that they may feel this emotion, but it doesn't mean they have to react to it. And that it doesn't mean just because you have an emotion doesn't mean that it has to come out. And I think that that's where people are mistaken in like, oh, Stoics don't feel anything. It's like, no, we feel things just the same as everybody else. It's just what we've practiced is not letting those emotions overrun everything. So that when I'm in a crisis situation, like what happened on Sunday night, I was cutting some cheese and not this Sunday, but a week ago, and accidentally sliced my fingers, and I had to go to the hospital and to get stitches in it. And it was just like, okay, where some people would be like, oh crap, what do I do? And you'd be out freaking out. I was just like, okay, well, I need to get to the hospital. And the best thing for me to do is to not freak out. I was more frustrated with myself because it was like 10 o'clock and I'm like, I have to get on the metro and I have to go to the hospital. And
you're thinking more about the inconvenience of the fact that you have to then go to the hospital rather than the fact that it's happened itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I knew I would be okay. And so me freaking out about it and going, oh my God, there's blood everywhere. I mean, and I did drip some blood on the floor and I had to wash some off the carpet and off my shoes. But just being able to take that beat and to look at things just more objectively so that when you feel those emotions of things, you just don't let them overwhelm you as much. And also the fact that you just don't let a lot of things just don't bother you anymore because you recognize that they don't really matter. It's like, I don't get upset when somebody, gossips about me because I don't really care what somebody else thinks of me anymore. And then that's something that has been a big change for me, was that for years, I was really worried about what other people thought of me. And if there was somebody that I wanted them to like me and I found out that they didn't, I was crushed by it. But through Stoicism, I recognized that I can't control other people and I can't control what they think of me. All I can control is who I want to be and how I want to act in this world. And as long as I'm comfortable and happy with that, then I'm going to be me. And if they don't like it, okay, I can't force them to like me. And so it doesn't bother me anymore. And so I think that that's another reason why people kind of take, Stoics, they're heartless, because somebody can try and insult them. Somebody can be rude to them. Somebody can, do things that others might consider awful. And the Stoic just goes, okay, people are going to people. They're going to do their things. And, like I got scammed here in Amsterdam when I was trying to get an apartment a few months ago. Ended up losing quite a bit of money on it. And I was more frustrated with myself that I didn't follow my gut instincts and go, yeah, this probably is a scam and I shouldn't I shouldn't do this. But no, I'll do it anyway. And then afterwards, after it happened, it was just like, okay, yeah, I didn't listen to my instincts, and yeah, this kind of sucks. Mm. And, a lot of people would be freaking out. They'd be pissed off. They'd be furious about it. But Stoics recognize that getting angry about something that you have no control over is just a waste of energy. It makes you feel shitty, and there's nothing you can do about the situation that's going on. So you are putting yourself in a bad mood because of something that's outside of your control. And that's kind of the way that you start to look at the world is, does this thing really matter for me to get that upset about?
Absolutely. It's that it kind of comes back to the idea of amor fati, that love of fate, which I think for people who have reconciled that kind of mindset, it's easier to do it where you say, I can always be like, spin whatever's happened to you into a positive. But how could, if someone is struggling with that kind of reconciliation with things happening to them and being able to look at it in a positive light, how does someone like counteract that natural like desire as a person to instantly want to change those unfavorable circumstances, which is probably what brings up those immediate emotions? How can someone help temper those?
I think a lot of it is just really understanding your own mindset. And the way that I kind of like to look at it is that if you are in a situation and you are trying to control things that you can't, then you're really truly wasting your time. And if you're not controlling the things that you actually can, then you are allowing yourself to become a victim. And I think that that's something that a lot of people miss, because just sitting and complaining about, oh my gosh, the world, all these things are happening to me. All these things, the world is awful. And why do bad things always happen to me? I mean, we all have friends who love to play the victim because it gets them attention. They feel like, basically they feel like the world is out to get them. And the thing is that, the universe doesn't care. I mean, it cares in that it's, the Stoics believe that there's a benevolent force that kind of runs the universe. I'm not sure where I fall on that, but the thing is that life is going to happen to you. And there's nothing that you can do about those things happening to you. You can't necessarily stop them. Things will happen. I mean, life moves forward. Otherwise, life would be incredibly boring if nothing actually happened. And so life happens to you, and you need to decide what you want to do about it. You need to decide, do I want to love these things that are happening to me, which is what amor fati is about, or do I just want to be angry about these things happening to me? And the thing is that you can be angry about it, but it isn't going to change it. And so it's really just about just accepting that, this is what happened to me and what can I do about it? And by taking the time to truly think through, is complaining about this helping? And maybe it is. Maybe sometimes you just need to complain about it, this is frustrating, and kind of let that out really quick. But when you continue to complain and that becomes your main focus about what's happening to you, then you're just wasting time and energy. And all it does is it just puts you in an even worse mood. When you can take that space and breathe and go, okay, this is what happened. What am I going to do about it? That's really what Stoicism is all about, is it's just recognizing that life is going to happen to you. And you just need to make a choice of how you want to view it and what you want to do about it.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say is that the fact that not hard, obviously it's just you that you control and you can't control anything else, might be quite overwhelming initially for someone who's always had a thought that they've kind of been able to implicitly control things that aren't actually them. So if someone's got that mindset where they're almost worried to like let go of that agency, almost where they feel like they have so much more control than they actually do, how can you become more able to finally let go of that feeling like you have to have control?
I think it's just, for me, it was very much about facing up to reality. And that's really what it comes down to. It's just that recognizing that as much as you want to have control over things that are external to you, You really don't. And you can spend out, it's really just, like I said, it's just about facing reality and recognizing that you don't have any control over these things. And for me, it was actually very freeing because then you have a very small bubble of things that you have to focus on and control. So you can let go of all of these things. So it's not that, I guess for me that was actually kind of a relief, because if I can't control what other people think of me, then I'm not going to worry about what other people think of me, because it's outside of my control. If you can kind of adopt that attitude of, if I can't control it, then why would I worry about it? Then it starts to help you relax, and you recognize that there's just there's very few things that you can control. And I kind of like to think of it as, if you kind of think of life as kind of like almost like a first person shooter game, you're just, you can't control all of these things that are happening around you. You can only control your character and what they can do in that. And life is kind of the same way. If you really truly recognize that you just have control over this limited thing within your sphere of influence, meaning your person, then you can let go of all of these other things. Like I said, you can let go of what other people think of you. You can let go of having to impress other people. You can let go of worrying about so many things in your life. And the things that we worry most about are what other people think of us, and trying to get other people to do things that we want them to, or trying to get them to agree with us and getting angry about that. I think most people get angry because of two things. I think it's often because they're scared of something, or it's because they're trying to control something that they don't have control over. So oftentimes when people get angry at other people, it's because they're trying to control them in some way. They want this person to do something and they aren't doing it. And so they get angry in an attempt to try and get them to do this other thing. And so anger really comes from a loss of control. And so the more angry you get, the more you're just showing how little control you have over in that situation.
Another practice that is discussed in the Stoic philosophy that might potentially help with that idea is premeditatio malorum. So what could you explain basically what that practice is and its potential benefits for people who worry about those kind of future things and feel like that lack of control is scary?
Yeah, for sure. So premeditatio malorum is the idea that, directly translated, means like premeditated malice, or premeditated disaster, if you will. And the idea is that rather than assuming that life is always going to go perfectly, which is what we tend to do, we tend to, for the most part, we tend to think things will work out really great for us. And, we do it. But then we have people on the other side who assume everything's going to always work out crappy. And this is kind of like practicing the idea of paying attention to the worst case scenarios, but doing so in a safe way. It's not catastrophizing. It's not assuming that life is just, oh my gosh, everything's horrible and it's going to go to shit. It's about taking the time to logically, rationally sit down and work through what is the worst thing that could happen here. And doing so in a safe space allows you to be prepared when those things do happen. And the other thing that it does, it also lessens it, because when you start to look at, all the worst things that could happen and you go, oh, could I live with that? Yeah, I think I might be okay with that. I mean, I had this happen to me probably about 20 years ago. I had gotten divorced, and this was before I knew anything about Stoicism. But when I learned about premeditatio malorum, I recognized that I had done this practice. And what had happened is I was basically broke. The company I was working for had bounced a bunch of checks. We found out later that the president of the company had been stealing money from the company, which is why we were bouncing checks. And I was paying child support and alimony. And I reached a point where basically, I had $17 to last me a week. And I was like, what am I? I just felt like I was kind of at the bottom, and I was worried that the company I was working for was going to go under, because they had this issue with these checks for a couple of times. And I sat down and I thought, okay, what's the worst that could happen? I'm like, okay, I might get kicked out of my apartment because I'm not able to pay my rent. Could I live in my car? Well, yeah, I could live in my car. It would suck, but I could live in my car. And I have a gym membership that, I pay $49 a year for, which, is a special deal that I bought forever ago. So I had a gym membership so I could go to the gym and shower every day if I needed to. And so I walked through all of these things, and I'm like, but, I've worked in software for 25 years. And at that point, I've been in software for about 8 years. And I recognized that, I still had skills and I could probably get another job, even though the job market was starting to tighten up then. But by practicing that, it really took the fear out of what would happen if I lost my job and I wasn't able to pay my rent and those types of things. And I also knew, I had family that I could call upon and borrow some money from if I needed to. And I did have some friends who helped me out in a tight spot like that. And I was really appreciative of that. But in taking that time to recognize that, it took all of that fear out of it. It was just like, okay, I know what I can do in this situation if it does happen. And luckily it didn't come to that, but few things did happen that I did have to borrow some money from some people, just to get through. But in doing so, then I was still able to stay in my apartment, stay afloat, and everything worked out pretty well in the end.
How did that experience then affect your later ability to then do that practice? Do you feel like that was a good catalyst for you to feel like that's a useful practice for you to do in the future?
Oh, absolutely. When I read about premeditatio malorum, I was like, oh, okay, there's a name for what I did. That's great. And so for me, yeah, it was just kind of a testament of, this is not a new idea. This wasn't something that I just happened to come up with. I mean, I did come up with it on my own, but it was just more of like I was panicking and going, what am I going to do? And yeah, and so for me, I just found that it was just kind of a continuation of that practice. And I don't practice it as much as I should, or I don't sit down and deliberately practice those things. I think that I've kind of reached a point in my life where I naturally just kind of think through, okay, well, this is what I want to happen, but what are are there other scenarios that I need to expect as possibilities? And in doing so, then I'm never really surprised by anything. And, nothing frightens me, because it's just like I've already gone through, well, okay, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And I think as I work on getting into my coaching business and working through some of those things, I'll probably have to do it a bit more. And I've actually been doing it kind of unconsciously in a way now that I think about it. Because as I'm moving from software into coaching, I want to do leadership coaching for tech teams and tech leadership. I'm finding that I have a bit of imposter syndrome because I've just been a software developer and a CTO for 25 years. And so to step out and to do something like this, where I'm teaching people, hey, this is how you lead ethically. This is how you manage stress. This is how you make decisions under uncertainty. This is how you build high performing teams. Has been a bit of a challenge. And so I've had to think through some of the worst case scenarios, like, okay, I'm not working full time right now. I'm working on getting this business up and running. What happens if I run out of money? What are the things that I'll need to do in order to make sure that I can, that I'm able to pay my bills and that I can stay here in Amsterdam? I need to start bringing in more income. What are some ideas? But doing so helps to relieve some of that panic, because I feel like then I have contingency plans. I have some options of things that I can do if things don't work out in the way that I hope they do.
One of the things about that, I would say, is that balance between improving yourself all the time, but also that's having self-acceptance of how you are at the moment. How would Stoicism approach that kind of topic in terms of the need to push yourself and achieve, whilst also not falling victim to the values of the world that I guess we kind of have now, where a lot of people only prioritize external achievements and material success. So where does that balance lie?
Yeah, I think so. Self-acceptance is kind of one of my favorite things to talk about because a number of years ago, I recognized that my self-esteem was not really attached to me. I attached it to my ex-partner and what I thought my ex-partner thought of me. And so when she was annoyed with me or frustrated with me, then I felt bad about myself and felt like I was a bad person. And we get into these big arguments about that. And I went down this process of trying to understand why it mattered so much what she thought of me or what I thought she thought of me. Not even really what she truly thought of me, but what I told myself she thought of me. And I recognized that it was because I felt like I needed that external validation. I needed somebody to tell me that I was okay. And I said, okay, well, what's so bad about me that I need that from somebody else? Why can't I just give that to myself? And so I was like, well, I don't know what's so bad that I need somebody else's validation. That's really an odd question. So I sat down and I wrote a list of everything I didn't like about myself. And it was quite revealing because there wasn't anything in there that was really all that bad or to be that scared about. And there was nothing in there that I couldn't accept about myself. I mean, I like it, but I can accept that this is just part of who I am. And once I did that, it was just like there was a big shift in how I operated as a person because I was able to practice that self-acceptance and I think what people miss is self-acceptance is not just accepting all the good things about you. You know, the good things about us are easy to accept. We like, you know, if we like the way that, you know, we laugh or the way that we sing or the way that we look or whatever it is that we do that we like about ourselves, it's easy to accept that. Self-acceptance comes from looking at the dark side of ourselves and going, oh, what are the crappy things about me? You know, maybe not the best friend that I could be. Maybe I'm a little selfish. Maybe, you know, I don't know. There's all kinds of things we can come up with about things that we don't like about ourselves. But we just need to look at them in a realistic manner. And Stoicism gives us that toolkit to kind of look at it objectively and go, yeah, you may not like this, but this is who you are. Can you just at least accept that this is who you are? Even if you don't like it, you're just accepting reality. And in doing so, it really takes a lot of pressure off you because then once those darker parts of you have just been accepted, you feel like a much more whole person and you don't feel like you're carrying this weight of something you're trying to hide from everybody else. So if you say, for example, that you can be a bit selfish sometimes, just accept that about yourself. And so when you've done something selfish, it's much easier to look at and go, yep, I was kind of selfish at that point. And then it becomes a little bit easier to not be as selfish because you've actually acknowledged that sometimes you're a bit selfish. And I think that right there is a really big aspect. And I did an episode on that. It's episode 218, which for me is one of my most important episodes. And so if there's one episode I would want anybody to listen to, that's the one where I talk about the whole experience I went through of doing this exercise. And I think it's incredibly helpful.
Did you find that self-acceptance ability led you to addressing your own happiness and fulfillment as a whole? And do you feel like now your happiness and fulfillment in your life differs a bit from what most people would say their happiness and fulfillment relies on?
Yeah, absolutely. I find that that having done that exercise, that my happiness level has gone up a lot. Or not even just that my happiness level has gone up, my stress level has gone down because I don't carry around this feeling inside of me that I'm not a good person anymore. You know, it doesn't mean that I think I'm perfect by any means, but it means that I just accept everything about myself, even the things that I don't like. You know, like I said, sometimes, and I was using that example of selfishness because in my past, I could be very selfish about a lot of things. And that came from a feeling of having to always look out for myself because my childhood was a bit rough. And so I felt like I had to get mine because there wasn't, other people weren't trustworthy enough to look out for me. And as I've recognized where that came from and accepted that, there are times when I act a bit selfishly, then it makes it a lot easier to be aware of that. And I'm much less selfish than I used to be. And I don't feel as lacking in my life. And so I can be more generous with everybody, including myself.
Another virtue of Stoicism that I've been reading about recently is the ability to have gratitude. How would one incorporate that into your life other than, I guess, just repeating to yourself or something like that when you're grateful for something? How can you actively incorporate gratitude more actively into your life, potentially?
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a moment. I think gratitude really comes down to just awareness and taking time to really be present. Because if we're constantly living in the future or worrying about future events or stressing about things we did in the past, then we're not really present. And so it's hard to be grateful for everything that we have right now if we're not living in the now. So I think that general awareness and taking the time to really try and be as present as possible and appreciate, where you are now. I know in Zen Buddhism, they oftentimes have certain meditations. They're waking meditations or working. I think they call them walking meditations. The idea is that you're not sitting down and eyes closed, but that you are practicing presence while you are doing something so that you are much more present while doing it. Like an exercise of taking a raisin or a grape and just putting it in your mouth and eating it as slowly as possible so that you can savor every single sensation and notice every single sensation as it happens and it hits the different parts of your tongue and the texture. And so practicing that presence and that ability to focus on the now and be able to focus highly on one thing, I think can appreciate your gratitude for a lot of things in life. So that's, I guess that's one practice you could try is just the more present you are, the more you can be grateful for what you have now, because like I said, you're not worried about the future or the past.
Yeah. Do you think Stoicism in that sense has a lot of similarities to a lot of more Eastern philosophies like Buddhism in terms of its approach to how you relate to your emotions and yourself and your understanding of your ability to be fulfilled in the world? But do you know what the similarities but also differences are between the two philosophies?
I do know a little bit. I'd studied some Buddhism quite some time ago. And yes, I joke around that, Stoicism is just Greco-Roman Buddhism because they do have a lot of similarities in the way that they talk about things. A great example of similarities between that is that, in Zen Buddhism, one of the core tenets is life is suffering, meaning we will suffer in life. Life is hard. And the Stoics, again, with amor fati, it's the same idea. Life is hard. Things will happen. But once you accept those things, then life is less hard. So if you assume that everything in life should go exactly the way that you want it to, then you're going to be miserable. But if you assume that life was just going to go the way it's going to go and you can appreciate and enjoy that and practice that not resisting life as it happens, I think those are definitely, some things that the two have in common. The other thing is in Buddhism, they say that attachment is the core of all suffering. And what they mean by that, and it took me a bit to understand what they meant by that, is that if your happiness, if your desire for something outside of yourself is what brings you happiness, you've placed your happiness on something that is external to you, then if that thing is taken away, you can be very, very unhappy. And that's the idea behind, if your happiness comes from having a big house, because then you get to show up to all your neighbors and you feel good about yourself because of this house. Well, what happens if there's an earthquake? What happens if there's a flood? What happens if your kid plays with matches in the basement and the house burns down? what happens if you lose your job and you're not able to pay for your mortgage payments and you lose the house? Then because you are so attached to this thing and you've made it a part of your identity, like I'm the guy with this big, gorgeous house, then when you lose that thing, it could crush you. And we see people like that who, are crushed when they have material loss because they're attached to their material possessions. And Stoicism teaches exactly that. They talk about how you should be, indifferent to externals. And it's the same thing as non-attachment within Zen Buddhism, that things come, things go. They're neither good nor bad. They just are things that are in your life. And they can either help you develop virtue or they can be something that hinders virtue based upon how you approach it. So being a wealthy Stoic is not a bad thing unless it makes you be a less virtuous person.
Yeah, I guess it all ties back to that ability to not overindulge in that want or need to be the best in any single aspect. But do you sometimes find it difficult to practice that Stoic mindset sometimes? Is there any particular practice or thing specifically that you find the most challenging, and how do you try and work on that so it affects you less?
I would say the thing that is still probably the most challenging is that even though I say I don't really worry about what other people think of me, in a sense I do. Like I said, as I'm working on creating this coaching practice and I reach out to possible clients and stuff like that, I find myself constantly worried about, am I saying the right thing on this call? Am I saying it so that they'll, did I say that the right way? Did I explain that thing the right way? And so I get in my head a little bit about worrying about if I'm convincing them that I'm somebody who can teach them. And I think that's just a natural part of the process of learning how to basically do sales calls and talk with people about, hey, this is the program I'm offering, and this is something that I think is of value to you. And so I think a lot of it for me is to remember that what I'm offering them has a lot of value, and I just need to make sure that they understand that value. And that's really all that I need to do. And if it's not something that works for them, then that's okay. It's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to be everybody's thing. But we get stuck on the outcome oftentimes. And we feel like if we don't get a certain outcome, then we're a failure. And so often getting stuck in, I'm not getting the outcomes I want, and getting frustrated with that, looking at how do I learn to love the process of what it is that I'm doing? Am I doing the process well? And if I'm doing that process well of anything that I'm doing, I still can't control the outcome, but there's a better chance that the outcome will be better if I focus on the process. If I'm too focused on why am I not getting this outcome, and I'm not focused on how can I make this process better, then I'm going to be unhappy with that. And so I think that that's probably something I'm struggling with, is that I'm not getting the outcomes that I want yet. And so I get frustrated with that. And so what I need to be working on is going back and looking at my processes of, am I explaining my message well? Am I clear about what it is that I'm offering to them? Am I tapping into solving the real problems that my clients have and explaining to them, hey, this is the problem that I see you're having, and I can help you with that, and making it clear that I can. So, yeah, so I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me, is that attachment to outcome.
Yeah, I think for me, mine is, I still battle with the idea of memento mori, because I think my brain misinterprets it the wrong way. Because I know that you're meant to frame it as that every day is an opportunity, every day could be your last, not in the sense that you should jump off a cliff or over, but in the sense of,
yeah,
I treat it like your last day or whatever people want to call it. But it's the case of every day is the fact that you're even here is incredible, so use it. But my brain jumps to, because you're here and you're so lucky to be here, every single decision you make is so important. And then there's that gravity too, that is when you mess up once that day, it's memento mori, that's a decision or a day that you've wasted or whatever. And I think trying to reframe that to a positive spin of, no, it's an opportunity you had and you took it, even if it was a little bit that day, you took that opportunity. Yeah. Whereas thinking about the bits I missed, why I missed that opportunity, I think that dichotomy there is something that I struggle with a little bit, that I need to reframe.
Well, I think if I can offer some advice, most things in Stoicism have kind of two sides to it. So there's not just like the dichotomy of control. It's not just about what you have control over. It's also all the things you don't have control over. And I call that, it's the idea of the two sides of the same coin. And Memento Mori also has two sides of the same coin. And one is make every day count because your life is important. The other is none of this matters because you're going to be dead anyway. And so it's like there's this cartoon that I stumbled on. I sent it to my kids because I thought it was really great. It shows, it's like a 2-panel thing, and it shows this this person, they're sitting there and they're just like, they have this really sad, sad look on their face, and they have this thought bubble above them. It's like, nobody gives a shit. And then it shows them the next frame, and they're going, wait, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's almost as if both can coexist. Like, no one cares about me. That makes me sad. No one cares about me. What I'm doing is not being judged. Like, I think that's my podcast right now, to be honest. Like, exactly. No one's listening to my podcast. Gosh, I get like 5 listens to podcast. It's not great. Like, it's only starting up. No one's listening to my podcast. If I like mess a little bit of the audio up or whatever, well, only 5 people listen to it, and it's a learning process. So, like, I feel like I'm having that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And mine, when I started my podcast, it was the same thing, where I was just like, I would worry about tiny little things, and I realized that I don't have that many listeners. I can just relax. And somebody else pointed out, they're just like, well, it's your podcast. You can do whatever you want with it. You mess up on it, okay, whatever. You talk about things that other people don't like, okay, whatever. It's your podcast. Do what you want. And recognizing that and just learning to relax into that can be incredibly empowering. So it's like nobody gives a shit. Hey, nobody gives a shit.
Just to wrap things up, I feel like this might be a bit of a cliche. You might have got this before, but if you could think of 3 practices, or maybe not even 3, just one core practice that someone could integrate into their life today that would greatly improve their happiness, their fulfillment, what would you suggest to someone who's just getting into this space and the idea of Stoic philosophy to do straight away?
I think anything that you could do that improves your self-awareness of the thoughts going on in your head. And everybody's going to be a little bit different with that, whether that's, writing. Some people it's definitely writing. Other people, it can be just, doing a stream of consciousness, or just talking out loud, thinking out loud, and just exploring what goes on in their mind, but just learning to pay attention to what is going on in your mind is really just, that's probably the biggest key, because that allows you to recognize, I'm trying to control something I don't have control over. That's, that right there, I think could really do a lot for it. The next, I'll give you 3. The next thing would be definitely practicing gratitude. I think when you, like we talked about before, everything kind of has 2 sides on it. When you practice gratitude, it makes you more present, because you're finding something in the here and now to appreciate and to be happy about. So you're actually making a choice to be happy in the present moment. But it also is the other side. The more present you are and the choices you make to be in the present moment, the more grateful you can be. And so everything kind of is, it's the cycle. The last thing, again, coming back to that self-awareness, doing 60 minutes of 60 days meditation, or 60 minutes of meditations for 60 days in a row. I know it sounds heroic and it's very, very challenging, but I promise you, if you do that, even if for all 60 minutes and you do it every single day, your mind is just bouncing around and doing crazy thoughts, it will make a difference in your life. In a long term, it rewires your brain in a very different way, because your brain, I think, works through a lot of the crap that is just kind of, that's been put on the back burner. It's finally able to work through some of the crap that you've been constantly putting off and not wanting to deal with. I think the subconscious then has some space to actually deal with some of those things. And I found that for me, ever since that exercise, my general level of calmness throughout the day is much, much better.
Erick, you've been an incredible guest. You have such great wisdom to share. And I think if people want to hear more of your stuff and see more of your stuff, where should they go to?
You can go to my website at stoic.coffee, and you can find the Stoic Coffee Break on all the major podcasting platforms. I'm also on social media, most of them. It's either stoic.coffee or stoic coffee. And I'm on most of the social media platforms.
Erick, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I wish you success on your show.